two extremes give Satan great satisfaction. Some in this world fall into the trap of disbelief in his reality. Kenneth Woodward, an American author, regards the devil as merely a trivial personification, hardly adequate to symbolize the mystery of evil. And some, on the other hand, have an overly keen interest in the devil and his dark world. In the preface to his famous Screwtape Letters, C.S. Lewis wrote this: "There are two equal and opposite errors into which our race can fall about the devils. One is to disbelieve in their existence, and the other is to believe and to feel an excessive and unhealthy interest in them. And they, the devils themselves, are equally pleased with both errors and hail a materialist and a magician with the same delight." And yet, in this world, there is no doubt that people can go overboard in their fascination with the devil and his demons. It was not long ago that in the suburbs of a major US city, a promising revival took place among a number of professional families. We're talking doctors, lawyers, business executives, and people like that. And it gave birth to a joyous, thriving Bible study group. And they saw more and more of their friends come to Christ. They saw marriages enriched, families restored, and the church that they were building, that God was building, was infused with new life. But in time, some of the leadership became overly fascinated with the subject of spiritual warfare and took their eyes off Christ to become self-styled experts in demons and exorcism. And things were clearly getting out of hand when one night they became convinced at the end of their Bible study that there were demons in the chandelier above them. And they ended their study by disassembling the light fixture and passing a piece out to each member of the group, who went and buried it in their back garden. And then the crowning embarrassment for this community came later when one morning some of the children were seen running by their neighbors down the road, shouting, "The devil is going to get us! The devil is going to get us!" And responding, the neighbors turned to their group and found people burying a chest in their garden that they thought had some supposed demons in it. And the lesson we can learn from that: if Satan cannot pull you down, he will just as happily push you overboard. And yet, on the other hand, we tend to find that most people in Western societies today do not appear to fear the influence of demons. If modern movies and novels are any indication for us, people may have a sense of foreboding that some supernatural, malicious evil is out there that haunts and assaults human beings, but it's only ever really in an arbitrary way. And Hollywood and storytellers have capitalized on this modern uneasiness in their thrillers and their horror tales. In these plots, we see insidious alien powers burst onto the scene, and it usually takes some form of a virtually indestructible being that can metamorphose into any shape and is bent on destroying individuals and eventually the whole world. Other movies have to do with an outbreak of some deadly, incurable disease that strikes fear throughout a region and threatens to devastate it. And still other movies center on a murderous human monster who has 9 lives and comes back in sequel after sequel to savage his victims. In each of these stories, the villains are usually dispatched by some violent means or scientific wizardry, which ends the movie, but never really completely solves the problem. These cinematic battles that we love to watch and read, that pit the forces of so-called light against the forces of darkness, show no knowledge of transcendent power or purpose to overcome evil, and have no awareness of how to actually defeat it once and for all. These stories assume that humans have the power and ingenuity to expel the evil from our midst. But this morning, Mark presents quite a different picture of the source of evil and how it is overcome. We see here that evil comes from a demonic power that seizes human beings. It is not something that we can defeat on our own. It takes a greater supernatural power to vanquish it. It takes the power of God. So as we study chapter 5, verse 1 to 20 this morning, this story of the Gerasene demoniac, we will affirm the biblical reality of Satan and his host. But in doing so, I hope we will refrain from promoting an unhealthy fascination with him. Our goal, and my prayer, is to reveal Satan's purpose and then to demonstrate Jesus' power over evil forces and his ability to heal the harm that they have done. But first, for us, a little context. If you weren't here last week, verses 1 and 2 reveal that Jesus' encounter with this man takes place the morning following the calming of the great night storm on the Sea of Galilee, which we heard about last week. Verse 1, it says, "They went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him." So we see Jesus come straight from his confrontation with the storm in nature to confront an equally violent storm in human nature. The region of the Gerasenes, on the other side of the lake from the strictly Jewish quarter, was Gentile country. And that was a very unsavory place, according to Jewish thinking. To the Jewish mind, that was where evil resided. And here we find Jesus deliberately going in that direction. And Mark has given us an elaborate and frank picture of the demoniac. The story is pathetic and heart-wrenching, for this was a truly tormented man. And to begin with, at the beginning of the story, he is demonized. The passage regularly speaks of him being demon-possessed, but the literal translation of that word is demonized, that is, under the influence of one or more evil spirits. And demonization can take can vary in degree of influence. And in this story here, we see it is extreme. Verse 2, "When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills he would cry out and cut himself with stones." So typically we see those under the sway of demons descend to filthy living, both physically and morally. And I don't think it's incidental that the rise of occultism and Satanism around the world today, in the last century, has been accompanied by increasing drug abuse, pornography, general obscenity. This man lived in the tombs, caverns hewn out of rock, furnished with dead men's bones, and covered with filth and vermin. And in a spiritual sense, how many people today still live like this, surrounded by the bones and regrets of past mistakes, past sins, sorrowness, and brokenness? Like this poor man, our world today, just as it was back then, is in as just a need of a saviour. And we read that the local townspeople had attempted to restrain him, but with terrifying Herculean strength, he had broken the fetters that had bound him. He was uncontrollable and dangerous. And inside, he was totally wretched. At intervals during the night and day, he would let out this unnatural howl and then gash himself with jagged rocks in an obvious attempt to drive out the evil spirits. This poor, naked man was a mass of bleeding lacerations, scabs, infections, and scar tissue, living in a delirium of pain and masochistic pleasure. And the man was running wild, naked, unkempt, and ill, and as a result, all his peers were against him. Little children would flee at his approach, and when he was in his right mind, however rare, he must have surely realized how repulsive and unloved and unwelcome he was. Last week we looked at Jesus rebuking or taming the storm, and this word subdue in verse 4 translates the same as well. This person is no longer seen as a member of society. He's not even seen as a human being, but as a wild animal in need of taming, in need of control, but in need of ostracization from society. Of course, not all demonization is so blatantly gross. 2 Corinthians chapter 11 tells us, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light, so it is no surprise if his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness. Demonized men and women can appear utterly conventional and within themselves. And on occasion, they can even be spiritual leaders in the wider Christian community. However, we must not think this morning that human beings must be demonized to descend to the degradation of this man. We know sin is a part of the human experience. James 1 tells us each person is tempted by his own desire. As the saying goes, I do not need to know what the heart of a bad man is like, but I know what the heart of a good man is like, and it is terrible. It seems this morning we need the theological wisdom and honesty of the little girl who had a terrific fight with her brother. When her mother came in and pulled her off, she said to her daughter, "Why did you let the devil put it into your heart to pull your brother's hair and kick him in the shins?" The little girl thought for a moment and said, "Well, maybe the devil put it into my head to pull my brother's hair, but kicking him in the shins was my own idea." We are all very capable of being evil all by ourselves. Nevertheless, demons can, and they do, drive men and women to the depths. Why? Because Satan and his minions hate God. They will do anything at any time to attack him. Mankind was created in the image of God, as we know from Genesis, and brings glory to him the more we manifest his image. Satan hates that. So the function of demons is to distort and destroy the image of God in man. A 19th century theologian, Werner Forster, says this: in most of the biblical stories of demon possession, what is at issue is not merely sickness, but a destruction and distortion of the divine likeness of man according to creation. The center of personality, the volitional and active ego of man, is inspired by alien powers which seek to ruin him. So if the glory of God is man fully alive, then it is true that the slaying of man, the distortion of the divine image through sin, is an attack on the glory of God. We must do everything we can through Jesus Christ by the power of the Holy Spirit who lives in us to enhance the image of God in our lives. But here in this story, the confrontation is inevitable. Because as verse 6, when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him. Jesus and the disciples have just beached the boat after the night storm and made it secure. And the next thing they know, they are being charged by a naked, screaming maniac. And surprisingly, this man casts himself down on his knees in front of Jesus, animalized, filthy, and bleeding. And then he cried out with a loud voice. And the tense that Mark uses in that sentence indicates that he screams an inarticulate cry before speaking that unnatural howl. And when that howl subsides, the disciples hear, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." Now, in those days, according to ancient belief, the reciting of someone's title wasn't a recognition, necessarily a confession or a recognition of that title, but it's a desperate attempt to gain control over that person. And that's what we see the demons doing here. But Jesus stands firm, addressing the spirit within the man, saying, "Come out of him, you impure spirit." And then Jesus asks, "What is your name?" And the spirit replies, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. Now for us today, that admission, that the impact of that "we are Legion" might be lost a little on us. But at the time, it would have made for a Jewish heart-in-mouth moment. A Roman legion was a military thing consisted of 6,000 foot soldiers, as well as 120 horsemen and countless technical personnel. So to the Jewish mind, legion brought an image of great numbers, efficient organization, and relentless strength and occupation. A host of evil spirits were leering upon Jesus from behind this poor man's wild eyes. So it was time for Jesus' power to be seen in a most unforgettable way. Verse 11, a large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs. Allow us to go into them." And he gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. And we can graphically picture the disappearance of pig after pig into the sea, can't we? But why allow the demons to enter the pigs? Well, for starters, the presence of 2,000 swine indicates big business. It may well be that the swine herders were Gentiles, given where they were, or maybe even compromising Jews who saw a great profit in selling pork to the Gentile market on the eastern side of the lake. And perhaps we can recall that in the Old Testament law, Jews are told that they are not allowed to handle or eat pork. And if this is so, then what Jesus is doing here is taking a swipe at their secularization and their materialism. And in the process, the pigs become vehicles of judgment to the unsuspecting demons who pled to be cast into them. And the swine stampeded unexpectedly due to the shock of demonization, blindingly charging into the lake to rid themselves of their new guests. And thus the demons become disembodied. And some scholars think they're confined to the abyss to await final judgment. But the dramatic end of the pigs was also powerful visual testimony to the man that he had been delivered. For the rest of his life, he would forever tell this story to anyone who would listen. It would never be forgotten. It would be written down. And to Jesus, this man is worth countless pigs. The destructive power of the sea that almost sank the disciples' boat now swallows up the demons. Throughout the Bible, we see that the sea or oceans or even deep waters signify chaos and judgment. Think of Noah and the flood, washing the earth clean, or the parting of the Red Sea to grant salvation for the Israelites, but condemnation for the Egyptians. And here, having silenced the chaos himself, Jesus overcomes evil for the sake of the man, and evil is fated to the depths of judgment as the lake swallows it up. The dramatic destruction of the pigs, coupled with what happened to the man, form an astounding display of Christ's power, as we see in verse 14. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. And when they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. We find the man sitting there instead of roaming about purposelessly among the tombs as he was before. In another gospel account, it says that he was sitting at the feet of Jesus, which we know from previous weeks in Mark is the posture of a disciple. He was clothed instead of naked. He was in his right mind. Literally, he was of sound mind, self-controlled. He was smiling at the right times, laughing at the jokes, and even devout in following. What a testimony to the power of Jesus Christ. Not only have we seen him calm the storm and still the sea, but now we see him completely blowing away evil itself. Note first that his contest with the demons, despite all its seriousness, is almost farcical. With a word, the illegitimate swine are off to hog heaven, and the demons are howling their misery for existence. And second, Jesus displayed incredible healing power. He restored his image in the life of this profoundly disfigured man. He was now rational, controlled, at peace, and most importantly, in communion with God. This is utterly amazing when we think of his wretched, loathsome existence before Jesus. Such transformation is impossible, except for God. And maybe this morning, this needs to go directly to our hearts. Perhaps this morning we find ourselves descended so low in sin and the mark so profound upon our life that we cannot believe we can be made whole. Maybe this morning you may have been or are being demonized. And as you hear this message, you're saying to yourself, Ollie, you're naive. You know nothing of the grip of evil upon me. You cannot feel my hopelessness, and if you could, you would not speak so confidently. My answer to you is that I know my Christ. I've experienced his healing power, and I have this testimony in his word that he can do it. So this morning, are you deeply scarred? Do you have filthy habits, perhaps a mouth that is totally out of control, that maybe is clean in public, but in private it hasn't been clean in years? Perhaps you find yourself living dishonestly, and it's become your way of life. Maybe your scar is sexual and you need help, and you feel you are beyond help. But not so. Jesus, who calmed the stormy seas, also calms the storm-tossed soul. And he can do it with just one word. But what do we read is the reaction of the Gerasenes? Do they rejoice? Is there a great revival in the area? Far from it. Verse 15, they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man, and told about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. We see there in their hearts, there was the healthy, reflexive fear that came from sensing they were in the presence of the supernatural. What they had seen was an undeniable miracle. The only explanation was God. But then there are other considerations that they quickly go through. Commercial considerations. A huge business had been felled in one blow. This Jesus was demanding some changes that would cost them dearly. The Gerasenes were a practical people and held property very importantly, as we might think all decent people would. But this community becomes another example of the outsiders from the previous chapter, outsiders from the kingdom who see but do not perceive, who hear but do not understand. It seems for these people that they could tolerate religion as long as it didn't affect business profits. And actually, they seem to prefer their pigs to their people, their swine to their souls. A poet, John Oxenham, sums up their reaction well in his famous poem. Rabbi, be gone, thy powers bring loss to us and ours. Our ways are not as thine. Thou lovest men, we wine. O get you hence, omnipotence, and take this fool of thine, his soul. What cared we for his soul? What good to us that thou hast made him whole, since we have lost our swine? How very modern that thought. What do we value most? The delivered man stood in sharp contrast to his peers. Do we stand in sharp contrast to ours? As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, "Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And all the people were amazed. Now, understandably, the man pleaded with Jesus to let him go with him. He was conscious of his weaknesses and was filled with grateful love. Who would not want to stay with the one who completely changed and saved his life? But we see the Lord turn him down, and this denial becomes the very avenue for this man's grateful service. Some years ago, an ophthalmologist, or an eye doctor, for those who don't know what that is, just fresh from eye school, commenced an eye business. And without friends, without money, and without patrons, he became discouraged. Until one day, he saw a blind man. Looking into his eyes, he said, "Why don't you have your eyesight restored? Come to my office in the morning." And the blind man went. And when an operation was performed and proved successful, the patient said, "I haven't got a penny in the world. I can't pay you." "Oh yes," said the doctor, "you can pay me, and I expect you to do so. There is just one thing I want you to do, and it is very easy. Tell everyone you see that you were blind, and tell them who it was that healed you." That is what this man did. He heralded the news of Jesus in the Decapolis, which means the 10 cities, and all the people were amazed. The splash created by the testimony of the man is more effective in showing who Jesus is than the splash created by the demons in the pigs. The latter leads to fear, but the testimony leads to faith. This story is part of a trilogy of stories about Christ's power. Last week, we saw his power over nature as he calmed the storm. This week, we see his power over evil. And next week, we will see his power over sickness and even death. The point is, this morning, he can deliver you from anything if you will come to him. Not only a miserable past, but present sins, your hatreds, your prejudices, your loathings. He can not only save your soul, but he can restore your proper love for your spouse, your children, your parents, your families. The thing that will stop Jesus is what the Gerasenes did. They sent him away. Tell him to leave you alone, and he will, but for a season. And if you tell him enough, there may come a time when it will be too late. So this morning, why put it off? Come to Christ for salvation if you haven't already. And come to Christ for healing if you need it.